The Industry 4.0 we hear about sounds like supply chain technology nirvana, doesn't it? Predictive demand forecasts, real-time risk assessments, virtual resolution rooms, and the dream of all dreams, all in a mobile user-friendly format. On our webinar today, we've gathered a diverse group of thought leaders to talk us through some of the major themes and product features of supply chain 4.0 technology. And importantly, we're going to start exploring some of the leadership decisions you will need to make when you sit on top of all this techno-bling. Questions like, where should the technology stop and where should the human element begin? Where will you need technology and where will you need the people? I'm Tanya Siri, founder of Procurious. Thank you for joining me on the webinar where we're going to be discussing the 4 supply chain capabilities that you need for the decade that's going to change the world. Today we've got 3 technology experts as our guests. A warm welcome to our first guest, Vijay Pandarajan, who's the Director of Offering Management at IBM Sterling. Vijay is focused on building intelligent, self-correcting supply chains. In this pursuit, he's the leader of IBM's efforts to build the next generation supply chain business network. Vijay has helped build IBM's business automation platform as a unified offering of related capabilities, including RPA, workflows, and content management through his experience of working with many Fortune 500 companies. So he has lots of supply chain technology experience to share with us today. But perhaps a little more interesting story is that Vijay's tech passion has been taken into high school, where he's been helping his son's robotics team. Vijay, do you want to share a little bit about that with us as we meet you today?
Oh, absolutely. It's a topic close to my heart. So my son's high school robotics team is actually competing in a VEX IQ or VEX robotics competition. And this year's challenge, they have to build a 12-inch by 12-inch robot that can pick up these cubes off the floor and then stack them in the corners. There's an added element that you can put things in towers, which multiplies the color of the cubes you have in the goals. But you can see where this is a huge mechanical engineering and a computer programming challenge for, let's say, 9th graders. So I have a lot of fun with that.
Oh, wow. And I can see that's already giving him a bit of an entree into supply chain. He might walk in his father's footsteps.
Oh, well, think about a WMS. What are they stacking in all of those warehouse management systems, right? On the warehouse floor. So yeah, he's right up there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today, Vijay. So our next guest is Adrian Long, who's the Practice Manager for AI and Data Science at Datacom. Adrian works with a range of industries, including government, banking, insurance, and telecommunication. He provides insight and advice on a wide range of areas, including workforce optimization, top-line growth, distribution and sales force efficiency, frontline operational model changes, cost structure reviews, and last but by no means least, and why he's with us today, supply chain. He's also no stranger to sharing his expertise far and wide. So Adrian's been a regular conference presenter for Microsoft Azure, Amazon, Alteryx, and Tableau.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a great year as I've had the opportunity to both attend and present at vendor events, as well as see peers at Chief Data Officer events and even CPA Australia. I think for me, the observation in the industry is that data and analytics is really transforming many different companies. And I really urge all practitioners to attend and actually learn from both presenters and customers. I pay particular attention to how companies are actually delivering and leveraging analytical use cases, which focus on how they automate their manual processes and embed machine learning into their business operations.
Fantastic. Well, Adrian, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today and exploring, because I know that's a challenge for a lot of our community, is actually how to make these technologies come to life and deliver business value. So thank you for joining us to share your knowledge. Our third guest today is Peter Klein, who's the co-founder of Collaboration AI. Now, Peter is what I really call a New World Nirvana thinker, because Collaboration AI uses data and AI to improve team performance. This tech he's developed is being used in Fortune 100 companies and also some of the major global conferences, including the World Economic Forum and TED. I was introduced to Peter through one of our favourite Big Ideas Summit speakers, the super smart futurist Greg Lindsay. So Peter comes highly recommended. And, you know, the team at Collaboration AI, as you'll hear today, are really fine-tuning the art of advanced technology facilitation that enables thousands of people to simultaneously collaborate together. So something we're trying to strive to do here at Procurious, but it's going to be great to hear how Peter and the team use this with Collaboration AI. So Peter, I understand you've spent over 30 years in supply chain. That's almost as long as I've been in the game. What fascinates you now, like this point in history that we're at with supply chain?
Well, as you would know, we have implemented IBM's supply chain and SAP's and just go through the list. And we always wondered, why is it some projects fail and others don't? And when you actually broke it down, it's really not a software issue, it's a people issue. And we were trying to figure that out and realize that if you build the right teams using a larger amount of data that can be ascertained in a quick interview or just in knowing someone through the work process, you can build better teams and get the software to work. And so that's really what got me to look at this problem is AI can look at more data and come up with a better solution.
And I'm going to love what we're talking about today, because it's really about how technology brings people together, which, you know, a lot of people are obviously concerned about it pushing us apart. But I think this is a really fantastic use of AI, as it all is.
Before you go on, though, I started using your platform 5 years ago. So congratulations on what you've accomplished.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Peter. Thank you. We aim to serve the community, so thank you. It's great. And I'm sure today's discussion is going to be of great use, because there's a lot of fantastic terms that have really sort of captured my imagination, and that's really what we want to dive into today, is to understand what some of these terms mean and how practitioners can adapt them, really, and make sure that they're on the leading edge of technology and not be daunted by some of these concepts or the technologies that support them. So why don't we jump straight into it? I love this term, self-correcting, and I think it's a nuance. It's a new terminology that, of course, encapsulates AI, but you know, says it so well, and I guess in a less daunting way, because this is what we want AI to really do for us, to keep on learning and make sure we don't make the same mistake twice, or as often the case, we make the same mistake thousands of times over. Now, we've explored AI a lot on Procurious and on these webinars, but the words self-correcting are new, and I really want to explore that and understand. And I think a great place to start, we always lean on IBM for some of this leading edge thinking. Vijay, can you please give us an update on what's been happening in AI in the last 6 months and this nuance of AI versus self-correcting and some of the benefits that will provide supply chain leaders in the coming decade?
Oh, certainly, Tanya. I mean, to your comment about self-correcting, right? I mean, self-correcting is an outcome. And as you can see, and, you know, I'll get into in a little bit why that is such a huge thing in supply chain, right? And AI just happens to be the means to get there, because ultimately you can't have people everywhere, and there's only so many things that a human can do, right? And humans are good at certain things, and the technology is good at others. So think of self-correcting as really the outcome that you would get. So if you think about first generation supply chains, right, if we just want to dig back a little bit, they were really good at automating and optimizing processes, but it was still very much in a functional, siloed context. And that's clearly not enough for what we need today, right? I mean, as every supply chains have been global for quite a while now, and the way that they have to interact across different suppliers and ecosystems of suppliers, that's clearly not, the first generation's one don't cut it anymore. So in this next chapter, we're really looking at supply chains that are more dynamic, that need to be more responsive and are interconnected. And that's really where self-correction has huge implications, right? Or the payoff is really, really big. You have to make the effort and the investment and the understanding and the commitment, I would say, towards driving the efficiencies that you need and being resilient to disruption. As we know, the supply chain only works as well as its weakest link. And so being able to understand and having a view of your supply chain becomes really important. And so if you're managing the next generation supply chain, there's the planning aspect of it, but even after you've gotten past the planning, the execution aspect of your supply chain is going to be fraught with a lot of challenge. It's a mixed bag, but from a physical goods supply chain perspective, it is not an easy time to be a supply chain practitioner. So if you think back to what was the last time we had these kinds of disruptions, I'll pick one from 2011 when there was a flood in Thailand where some of their tier 2 suppliers were, and it was providing supply parts into one of their most profitable assembly lines. And they didn't know that they were going to be disrupted until the parts didn't show. And then when later they looked back on it, they didn't know where the suppliers were. These particular set of suppliers happened to be in Thailand where a flood hit. A few things come to mind immediately, right? There's the sense of knowing where what is. We tend to call it visibility. But end-to-end visibility, not within a functional silo, right? So that's the difference between the previous supply chains and what we need today. And then when something starts transpiring, when an event starts happening, the ability for the humans on the other end to actually cope and understand what is going on. And this is really the place where we see something like AI providing self-correcting outcomes, because the sheer volume of information isn't one that a human can process. Really, the human is in the best place possible to say, these are your possible options, pick one. Or and even that, at some point, if the machine gets good enough at knowing which is likely to be the option, it can provide that kind of guidance. So an area that we've been working on is really around what we call transaction intelligence, right? And really what we're able to do is look at anomalies in terms of where goods are in their shipping process as they're being shipped, right? And this gives you a real leg up because not all deliveries are the same. Different classes of goods operate in a particular framework, right? And the machine learning models know that. And when something sticks out of the norm, an exception is flagged, right? That's an anomaly that gets flagged. And so while you might have a lot of different things happening, you only want to focus on the ones that matter to you. And so self-correcting and helping the human user is an area that we're particularly excited about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's, always interests me about IBM, you think, oh, we're just developing, not just, you're developing all these fantastic solutions, but part of that reason is that you've actually got your own $30 billion supply chain. And, I remember talking to Joanne Wright, who was the chief supply chain officer when the tsunami hit Tokyo, and I know that your supply chains were damaged and that you were concerned about your visibility. So a lot of this technology you've developed is actually out of a need to manage your own supply chains, which I think is great. You're actually using what you've developed, and I'm so glad that you've raised this challenge between where does the AI start and end, and where do we use our own people to make a judgment of calls and decisions. And I'll call on you now, Adrian, because I know that you're on the front line of a lot of these technology implementations, and you're helping companies decide where they should draw this line between using AI and people. From your experience, what is the power of having these self-correcting AI-driven systems?
Yeah, I think many organizations are really on that journey to leveraging AI-driven systems. The key challenge that they face is often companies have data assets across many different data silos, both internal to your organization as well as that to your supply chain. So that presents a challenge. What I see happening in the market is that connectivity and interoperability between data assets is really critical between organizations. So the most successful companies really recognize that AI doesn't actually take away the human in decision making, but it actually augments their decision making by ingesting data and enriching data from different sources, not just their own internal company data. After that, the power comes from the way where AI can then present humans the options to actually recommend the next best action. So that's where I really see AI coming into being.
So how do we know when it's time to draw the line on AI making the decisions and have our own people step in and use their judgment?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that context matters. Although AI is really good at delivering a very narrow band outcome, for example, image recognition of people number plates or identifying cancer cells or looking at customers that will churn, ultimately people have a sense of whether the recommendation served up actually makes sense. This is really important because during your machine learning process, when you train the algorithm, there may be some bias in the training data set. So I'd like to give people an example where imagine if you went for a job interview and you just purely evaluated by a machine learning algorithm with no person. Well, this might seem on the surface more efficient to an organization. The algorithm might overlook other humanistic attributes like how do people actually work in teams or how do they make decisions in crisis scenarios. So these are the sort of edge cases that you want to build in, and this is something very difficult for AI currently. Another example is credit checking. Take, for example, if you went to a bank and there's no credit officer, it's just a simple machine learning algorithm running through approving your home loan. If you fell between certain edge cases, you wouldn't want the bank to just reject you. You want a person, a credit officer, to review your application and not just outright deny you. So I guess in summary, it's really important that to understand that AI is the enabler, but ultimately people should take accountability for the recommendations being served up, because only people can sense check what actually makes sense in those circumstances.
Thank you for raising that whole idea of teams and, people being able to be rational and make some of these decisions, because I've really been wanting to draw Peter into this conversation because collaboration AI is all about using the power of machine learning and the power of AI to make work. And that's what you've been saying, Peter. What do you actually mean by that?
Well, all the great equipment in the world, typically without people, doesn't work. And, if you think about all our great leaders that we've had in businesses, they've said, our people are our greatest assets. And collaboration, we need to collaborate more. Basically, what's happening is teams fail. And they fail because they don't typically work together. And so really what this is about is taking the knowledge, as Adrian said, and applying AI to it and let it take most of the work away. And then you deal with the really tough situation. So for example, when you're building a team, and if you take the DISC personality method, for example. And of course you have Myers-Briggs, but let's use DISC for a minute. And they believe you break the world's people into 4 different types: decision makers or dominant people, influencers, et cetera, et cetera. And imagine that when you put 2 Ds together, you have a team that won't work. The machine can figure out who are the Ds and make sure you don't put 2 in one team.
I didn't know that you could be that scientific with leading a team. I need to learn more. And where do you see self-correction featuring in the collaboration space?
So self-correction usually takes as, we've got a new project, I need a team. And the leader says, well, who should I get? And they go to the different departments, and who do they get but the people who aren't busy, right? Rather than who are the people that you actually need to make this work? And will these people's personalities get along with each other? Do they share common goals? Do they all have younger children at home? And of course, we can figure that out by looking at their Facebook and TikTok accounts and Snapchat accounts. And so you really pull those together, and that's what makes teams successful.
It would also avoid a lot of bias then, wouldn't it? Gender, any sort of unconscious bias.
It would, but again, anything you build will have built-in biases, unfortunately. We haven't gotten over that problem. You try to eliminate them, but it's not quite that good.
So it sounds like a very powerful tool, being able to identify thought leaders and influencers in a knowledge network that may not otherwise be involved in solving important issues. But are there any limitations to that approach? I mean, you've just really raised one, haven't you, that bias is sort of embedded?
Well, when you're solving a problem and bringing a team together, one of the things that we've discovered over, again, running this for a lot of the world's Fortune 100 companies, is that the answer to your problem is typically not in the people you bring on the team, but it's in their network. And of course, when you pull a team together, you can't possibly guess their network. But you can by harvesting the data of their second level connections or their first level connections. So the real power from this comes is we as humans can't deal with that much data. And so if I'm so right now we're working with Quintus with a couple of supply chain companies trying to work on rejigging their supply chain. And the fact of the matter is we can find more information about how to solve the sourcing problems from LinkedIn than we can through our normal purchasing systems as they try to find alternatives.
This has been a great conversation about this line between AI making decisions and where us as humans and leaders step in. But let's just go back to our self-correction discussion. And let's return to you, Vijay. What is the New World thinking on this, and how's it going to shift the dial for supply chain?
When you think of self-correction, right, it doesn't sort of happen overnight, is what I would say. It's usually you have to build some competency to get to that point. We've talked a little bit in this conversation about training the models and et cetera, et cetera. So some of it means that you have to have access to data in a particular way. And there are ways that you can, that we work on making that simpler for you at IDM because, we've got a lot of the data ourselves that we can generalize and then train. That said, let's take a step back as to when you would need to apply self-correction and when does something lesser than self-correction just solve your problem, right? I think at the end, we look at what the customer outcomes are. And to look at this, I almost go to like a maturity model, right? So if you think of a 5-stage maturity model, level 1 and level 2 are maybe manual and they're analog. Level 3 is, you're digitized, you're getting your data all collected in the right way. And then level 4 and level 5, you're pretty sophisticated in terms of what you're doing, right? And really somewhere in a level 5 is probably when self-correction is going to really help you because you've got the other systems in place, right? So I think it kind of helps to set the stage like that. The point, though, on getting to self-correction is that you've got to have the systems that are interconnected, that are then plumbed in with the right data sources that you need that have, like I'd like to say, an end-to-end view on what you're optimizing for. And really, the example at that point is, how am I going to, now that I've got these data streams coming into me, how can I make the best choices with what I have, right? And to some extent, maybe in a level 3, you've got a dashboard and somebody's monitoring the dashboard. It's maybe human intensive, but you can get by, right? And then the order of magnitude of information goes up. And then the dashboard doesn't cut it anymore. So then the alerts don't cut it anymore. And at some stage like this, you're in a multimodal form where you need some help. And like we were saying, right, humans are really good at making trade-offs between 1, 2, 3, maybe tops 5 things, right? But if you have to make a trade-off between something like 20 things, that's not what we're good at. And that's where you want to apply some of the AI technologies. Practical example, we have something called fulfillment optimizer, right? Which helps you decide which store a retailer should serve a particular online order from, right? And obviously there are many factors that go into that decision, right? Like maybe the simplest thing is ship it make it so that it's the cheapest shipping cost. But sometimes that's sort of myopic, right? And really what you want to be optimizing for at all times is that avoiding stockouts, which means you've got to be more sophisticated in where you want to draw down your inventory. And something like fulfillment optimizer actually helps you do that, right? And we've pre-trained it with data that we have. So, and then client doesn't have to worry about it. So, even if you're a level 3, as long as you have the data streams coming into it, you don't have to do the heavy lifting. And you can tell it what you're optimizing for at that moment, right? Are you optimizing for the lowest shipment cost? Are you optimizing for no stockouts? And the optimizer actually can make those choices for you. And now we're back in the realm where, we're playing to the strengths of us as humans, where we're trying to make the choices, at the level that we are good at making those choices, and leaving the rest to the technology.
I think we've spent a great, discussion time on the idea of having self-correcting, and I'm really keen to move on to this philosophical discussion about being open, which is the second capability we think supply chain leaders need in the next decade. Look, I know when we designed Procurious, I'd originally wanted a closed private network, only for verified procurement and supply chain professionals. But my team really convinced me that open networks were indeed the way of the future, because they enable different perspectives and views on the platform that would lead to more innovation, creativity and problem solving. And I'm so glad that we did that, because I think the community's really benefited from, the full scope of perspectives. So if we stay on this philosophical sort of side of the argument for a while there, should we have open networks or closed? And Peter, I think you'd be great to comment on this, because when we think about optimal collaboration, if there's such a term, that is how we get the best thinking from the best type and number of people. I'm assuming that having an open network is best. Is that right? And can you explain the pros and cons of having open versus closed networks?
We're big believers in open networks, and we require them in order to get the data from these different networks. Now, we've seen organizations in the past, as we saw with the U.S. elections, where they misused a lot of the data on Facebook. And where we see this as LinkedIn slowly squeezes the API since Microsoft bought it, is we're starting to have trouble getting at that data. And what we see is a shift, though, because people are going to realize my personal data is worth a lot of information. People are using it to sell me things, to make work better, you name it. And as the LinkedIn lookalikes that are building this on the blockchain, we're going to be able to sell that data. But it's going to make it so that for us to supply services or for advertisers to sell things, we're going to have to get access to that, but we're going to pay it. And we're making money for it. There's no reason why the people out there that are providing the information shouldn't have that.
Okay. Well, Vijay, what about ERPs and technology systems? They've traditionally been closed. And can you explain why has technology evolved this way and why you in particular have moved to an open framework and what benefits you're hoping it'll give supply chain customers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from a historic perspective, right, the ERPs were built out to be a reflection of my organization's view of the world, right? That's where all the information came to rest and it became a system of record. But it was always from my viewpoint or my organization's viewpoint. And as we get into things like multi-enterprise business networks, which interconnect different providers and suppliers and trading partners, the idea that everyone has their own copy and that I have to compare my copy with your copy and then, we do a bunch of reconciliation. We spend a lot of time, a lot of the friction lies in that kind of situation where reconciliation is the name of the game. And you can see how we got there from a historic perspective, right? But if we're really going to be orders of magnitude better, then we need to be thinking of ways in which we can collectively share data that is common to us, right? It's your data, my data. It's our shared view of that piece of data, and we really think open networks are going to facilitate that. And open doesn't mean insecure, right? Quite the contrary. It means that we have a common way in which we can access this information, and that is very democratic, right? And anyone who has the rights to access that data can, and the systems are built in that manner. And so, as opposed to just internal systems that only within a company you can get at, now we have open systems that external ecosystems can connect into, and it's designed with that in mind. The access systems, the APIs, and the way that all of this can be managed. So it's an area that we feel we have a great competitive advantage in, and frankly, we believe it's the best way to do business. And recently, we've picked out what we call our developer hub for supply chain, where we're starting to host a lot of this information, right? The ease of how you interoperate with us. That's the place where you go, and we've done a nice job, I think, of pulling all of that together.
Fantastic. So it sounds like the open system is very democratized, and anyone can come in and develop new applications, very collaborative. Speaking of which, Peter, in your earlier response, you were very pro-open networks, obviously with Collaboration AI. So what are some of the benefits of open systems in the collaboration world from your perspective?
So when you're talking about other people using our data, for instance, so we have the ability to take any group of people and tell you who will get along and work the best together. So, for instance, the World Economic Forum, they would use our engine to, as they're trying to figure out, I've got the world's richest people there, and I need to know who should sit by who, because I want them to leave saying, hey, I just had the best dinner. Because you sit at a table of eight people, and you can't hear anybody but who's to the left and right of you. And so it's important where you sit. So they grab we get the data on the people, we tell them where they should sit, and then they use that to run their conference. So again, providing the person that's sitting on either side of you and yourself information that will facilitate a conversation that would then might be able to solve world problems. So we love it. We love for people to tie into it. And the only way we can do it, as Vijay said, is to what is the shared data and how can that make the world a better place?
Wow, sounds amazing. I think we need to be using some of that technology on Procurious, but we'll take that offline. Adrian, we need to bring you back into this conversation. From your perspective, is the open network approach really taking off?
Yes, I do definitely see a lot more companies these days enabling data transfer through open APIs. I see this quite often in the area of CRM customer applications. And I think being able to operate and combine data sets from multiple sources, some of which that sit outside your company, you're able to drive through a better customer outcome. So take, for example, your local hardware store or supermarket. They might actually ingest things like weather data and traffic and combine that with their internal CRM data to have a special offer on things like umbrellas when it rains, or fruit and drinks on a hot day. So an example of this would, this really delivers significant value for a company to leverage data that actually sits outside of their own internal CRM space.
Very practical solutions there. Now, we should move on to our third capability that we think supply chain leaders are going to need in the next decade, which is getting across a network of networks. And this is one of my favourite capabilities because I love the idea of connecting up all the knowledge networks that exist around particular topics, industries, issues, and learning from them, and gaining expert insights, increasing visibility, and using the wisdom and the power of the crowd to solve problems. Peter, is this essentially what collaboration AI does?
It does, and it's about collaboration. And the example that I think is the most exciting one that we're working on right now is with the U.S. Space Force, and they have a division called AFWorks, and they're running at the DEF CON. Now, DEF CON is the world's largest hacking convention, and it's been running for 26 years. And people get together in Vegas and try to hack different things. So the Air Force is saying, all right, we want to bring together the best group of people in the world to collaborate. So crowdsource first, and then collaborate to what they called Hack-a-Sat. And so they're going to open up one of their satellites and let groups of people hack it. So our software will look at it's close to 30,000 people who are hackers out there today. And those that want to participate, it will put them into teams that we know will be successful. And they'll have 8 hours to hack a U.S. Air Force satellite in order to get to do 3 things. Absolutely impossible, because we got to bring together people who care about the same things. And what we found, little things like if you put 2 people together that have a health issue or have cancer in their family, they will become friends for life and solve the problems. So there's, again, a network of networks. I think that's one of the most amazing examples that I've seen in my lifetime.
Oh, thanks, Peter. It's fascinating to hear how, network of networks can be used to promote collaboration between people. And it's certainly a subject that's front of mind for us at Procurious as we create this collaboration network ourselves. So, Vijay, when we look at supply chain technology, what are the opportunities here and how are we going to be able to create a network of networks into the future?
Yeah, in a supply chain context, it's actually a really interesting phenomenon, right? Like we've had different groups of people coming together to essentially they form their own ecosystem that cares about a particular thing. I'll give you an example. Something like Food Trust that IBM worked on with Walmart and a number of fresh food industry folks. It really is interested in the provenance of where certain greens were grown, how did it move through its own supply chain. It's an ecosystem in itself. and it really forms its own network of people having that discussion, sharing a number of documents and transactions across. Take that as one example. Think of something else like a Project 44, right? Now they're pulling together all the different transportation companies and are managing interactions between them. It's another sort of ecosystem amongst itself. I'll give you another example. TradeLens is something IBM was working on with Maersk, right? And this is about ocean shipping. And what you kind of see is that these are almost communities that have grown together about a particular problem. And then when you take something like what we do at Sterling with the Sterling Business Network, we're facilitating trade with, for a large part of the U.S. population, worldwide population. And we find it really interesting to bring in information from these other communities or these other ecosystems. And so in our mind, that's sort of where the network of networks idea plays in. Because, within our own supply chain business network, we have a very good idea of where certain transactions are, and we're able to keep our clients and their suppliers in sync. But we become even more effective if we can bring in further information on ocean shipping, say from TradeLens into this network. And so for us, in a very practical standpoint, this idea of network means that we have richer information that we would have not had before, because we're able to interconnect these ecosystems of people that are really making great strides in a particular area. So for us, we really see this as a collaborative way to have a better view into your supply chain, and it's a very natural thing for us to do. It really yields massive outcomes in terms of end-to-end visibility.
What I'm loving about this conversation is, our intent was to originally look at, these 4 supply chain capabilities, but what we've talked about so much is the human element and how technology is really driving a lot of social outcomes. I mean, from getting people better credit decisions in their life to, food trust, solving world problems, space problems. It really is heartening to see that there's almost a soul within supply chain, and that the issues we're seeing in the community are really reflected in the ways that we're managing supply chain. So that's just a little insight there. Look, our last capability, and I guess what we all want in our lives and in our supply chains is control. I mean, there's nothing worse than not knowing what's going on in your supply chain, waking up to a problem where you don't have the data or the information, just like it is waking up to a problem in your personal life, I guess. But let's look at the things we can control, and we're hearing a lot about control towers. Adrian, why don't we hear from you? How do these control towers work, and what's sort of nirvana in this sense for this capability?
Yes, I'm starting to see quite a lot of interesting use cases in industry regarding control towers. I think ultimately, I always give people this really simple example. If you have an Apple phone or a Samsung phone, you literally turn it on and say, "Hey Siri, do something." It provides an abstraction layer where it takes away a lot of the complexity of machine learning at the back, right? So companies can use either voice or visual mechanisms to abstract away that complexity on machine learning and provide an avenue for people to actually interact in the way that they're comfortable interacting. So take, for example, when the machine recommends a next best action, you can actually embrace that decision and make that decision in a way that actually makes sense to the human rather than struggle with all that data. So basically showing how all the data points coming together in a way that makes sense to humans. So that's really a good example of how AI and humans can work together to add value and make better decisions.
Thank you, Adrian. And Peter, this will probably be your last question from me for today. And I'm not sure if there is much of a story we can say about control towers and human collaboration, but is there a control tower story in the work that you do?
So from a control tower, it's all about knowing and getting better results. And what we've seen when you apply AI to people and teams is that your people will be 3 times more productive. When we've worked with the University of Minnesota, their student engagement and participation saw a 70% increase. And if you think about when you have conferences or meetings, you get a 96% better networked participants. In other words, if they originally come and they meet, 6 to 8 people that they talk to, they exchange some business cards, you get the improvement is beyond belief. So controlling means looking at it. That's our kind of insight. And we watch those figures.
Wow, that's certainly some great return on investment and improvements in productivity there. Vijay, our last question for the day, control towers. How do you see this capability taking shape within our supply chains in the coming decade?
Yeah, when we talk about control towers in supply chain, really what it is managing the end-to-end outcome, right? It's very outcome driven. And we like to say, no 2 supply chains are the same. And hence, no 2 control towers can really be the same. But the nucleus of many of them, and ultimately, you want one control tower to rule them all, if you will, right? Because otherwise it doesn't really mean anything to have 3 different control towers. So when we think about all of this, right, we at IBM, we really think about how can we seed a control tower strategy for you with a piece of technology first and the core elements that you would need. So inventory usually in any supply chain control tower becomes front and center. So we believe in providing some kind of, we call it a blueprint, right? So a blueprint that jumpstarts how any client manages the inventory with their set of suppliers and trading partners. From there, you may want to add on what the downstream impact of that inventory might be, right? The financial impact. So if certain sets of things are delayed or you're not getting your accounts receivable back in time, what does that do to your financial position? And that's one example. You could take it in other directions. You could look at what the downstream impact of your production schedule might be for something else, and hence what's your financial position at the end. So you can kind of see that, with just some core ideas like inventory within a control tower, you could be optimizing for many end outcomes, which truly are just uniquely dependent on your business. So for us, we've spent a lot of time, I would say, modularizing our AI capability, the self-correcting capability, and then seeding these control towers with some starting points that clients can then take, be immediately productive with, but then add on and maybe even create their own extensions, keeping with the open concept, or work with partners to create their own extensions to it. So it uniquely represents, what they need to see to drive their business forward. So it really comes together at the end at this, in this extensible open control tower that has been seeded with some core technology from us to begin with.
Thanks, Vijay, and what a great way for us to end the webinar on how these 4 supply chain capabilities are going to work together in the decade ahead. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and we've certainly covered a great deal of ground. I think we've taken up the full hour. I hope all our listeners have really enjoyed what we've covered. So what we have covered, just to summarise, is the capability of self-correction and how it's developed, and also the debate about human involvement and the skills you'll need to make the call to get your people involved. We've heard how open networks can be the catalyst for really getting tech solutions to work in new and innovative ways in areas tailored to your organisation that can really add value. We've explored the network of networks concept and heard that technology can enhance connections between people across supply chain and across the globe. And we finished up with examining how all these capabilities come together in a control tower to provide that augmentation that's going to transform how we work and the supply chains that we manage. And the great news is that Tech Nevada is no longer a dream and fast becoming a new reality. So that's the end of our webinar on the 4 supply chain capabilities that you need for the decade that's going to change the world. And many thanks to our panel, Vijay Pandarajan, Adrian Long, Peter Klein for their contributions today. If you'd like to listen to this webinar again or share it with your peers, we'll be making the on-demand available on Procurious from tomorrow. And if you want to explore what's possible using these capabilities, why not ask a question on our discussion forum to keep the debate going. Thank you for taking the time to listen in.